In the crumbling corners of the medieval world, where desert winds whispered through mountain valleys and empires, watched one another with suspicion, a rumour began to spread quiet at first, like a faint heartbeat beneath the surface of history. It spoke of men who moved unseen, guided by faith and bound by secrecy. They were said to strike only once, always with purpose, and vanish into legend before the dust settled. These were the first murmurs of what would later be called the Assassin Brotherhood, though at the time they were known by another name entirely, the Nizari Ismailis, a small sect hidden within the great folds of Islam. No chronicler can pinpoint the exact moment they were born. Some say their roots lay in the crumbling unity of the Fatimid Caliphate, where the faithful fractured into rival interpretations of truth. Others insist they emerged from older traditions, drawn from Persian mysticism and the secret schools of thought that thrived in silence. What remains clear is that from the beginning, their story was woven from shadows. Every record we possess seems to carry the fingerprints of censorship erasures, where meaning should be, contradictions, where facts ought to align. It is as though history itself recoiled from remembering them. In the highlands of Persia, a figure known as Hassan Sabah was said to gather disciples to a fortress called Alamut, the eagle's nest. But even before his rise, whispers spoke of hidden teachers travelling between Cairo, Ray, and the mountains of Dalam, sowing seeds of a faith that dared to mix theology with rebellion. Theirs was not a religion of peace, but of precision belief sharpened into a blade. Their doctrine taught that truth was layered, that beneath every visible world lay another, unseen but infinitely more real. Perhaps it was this idea that birthed their devotion to secrecy and the conviction that only a chosen few could pierce the veil of illusion. Centuries later, storytellers would claim the assassins inhaled hashish before their missions, that paradise was promised in return for obedience. Yet those tales, carried by crusaders and European chroniclers, tell us more about the fears of outsiders than the reality within the fortress walls. What if the narcotic haze and mystical gardens were inventions, tools to make an incomprehensible order sound like madness? What if the real intoxication was not of the body, but of power? Beneath the sands of the Near East, where caravans crossed and armies bled, an invisible network was forming. From mountain to city, from scholar to soldier, messages travelled faster than reason could follow. The Brotherhood's reach grew, not by conquest, but by belief. Faith transformed into a weapon so disciplined that kings began to tremble at the mention of their name. Yet even now, scholars disagree. Were they freedom seekers defying tyrants, or instruments crafted for a purpose none dared to name? The truth, perhaps, lies buried between those two worlds, waiting to be unearthed as politics, power, and faith begin to intertwine. In the 11th century, the world was a chessboard drawn in blood. Caliphates fractured, empires collided, and faith was wielded like a blade sharper than steel. The Seljuk Turks stretched their dominion across Persia. The Abbasid Caliphate fought to hold its crumbling authority, and from the west came the marching crosses of the Crusaders, carrying both zeal and greed. In this turbulence, the assassins did not simply appear, they were summoned, as though the age itself demanded them. Chaos had created its own answer, an invisible order that could strike where armies could not. The political landscape of that time was not built on trust, but on survival. Every ruler feared betrayal, every court was a nest of spies. In such a world, the art of assassination was less an act of evil than a form of diplomacy. To remove a rival quietly was preferable to open war. Yet the assassins elevated this dark craft into something almost divine. To them, killing was not murder, it was purification, the removal of corruption to restore balance. They believed that each dagger thrust was guided by sacred purpose, and that to die fulfilling it was a form of ascension. At the heart of this dangerous balance stood the Crusaders' foreign warriors who mistook the Holy Land for a trophy. To them, the assassins were little more than phantoms, appearing in the night to undo alliances and topple commanders. But to the fractured Muslim states surrounding them, the Brotherhood was something far more complex, both an ally and a threat. Sultans, who once condemned their methods, would later whisper their names in secret, bargaining for their services, knowing one letter could decide the life of an emperor. It was in this era that the assassins' true reputation began to crystallize. Their strikes were surgical, always aimed at the most vital point. Never the battlefield, always the mind. Ministers fell from balconies, generals collapsed in prayer, and tyrants awoke to find daggers pinned beside their pillows, messages carved into the steel. You are seen. It was not chaos they dealt in, but control. Every action carried the weight of calculation. Their enemies learned to live in fear not of armies, but of ideas. The notion that no wall, no fortress, no guard could keep the unseen from entering. And yet, for all their influence, the assassins never sought to rule in the open. They existed between realms too powerful to ignore, too elusive to destroy. Some called them heretics, others liberators. But perhaps both were true, for the Brotherhood thrived in contradiction. Born of faith, yet serving no single master, bound by secrecy yet shaping the visible world. Across deserts and mountains, whispers grew. Who commands them? Were they pawns of princes, or did they serve an older, hidden intelligence? In the quiet that followed each assassination, that question lingered like smoke after a candle's flame. The answer would soon take form in a name: Hassan I Sabah, the man they called the Old Man of the Mountain. In the shifting sands of the 11th century, when faith and empire collided like restless stars, a man named Hassan I Sabah stepped out from the margins of obscurity and into legend. His name would one day echo across continents, whispered by merchants, soldiers, and kings who trembled at its sound. Yet in the beginning, he was no more than a scholar, a seeker of knowledge, drawn not to the sword, but to the secrets hidden between the lines of sacred texts. Born in Persia, he was a man of intellect before he was a man of power. The world he entered was one divided by belief, and in that division he found his calling. Hassan's journey began within the sprawling cities of the Islamic Golden Age, where learning and suspicion shared the same narrow streets. As a youth, he was said to have studied with theologians in Rai and Isfahan, where the voices of Sunni orthodoxy clashed with the quiet defiance of the Ismaili sect. It was here that he encountered the teachings of the hidden Imam, a figure believed to hold divine wisdom, guiding humanity from behind the veil. Something in those teachings took root in Hassan's mind, something that burned with both faith and rebellion. Conversion, they say, came not through persuasion but revelation. To follow the Imam meant to reject the visible order of power, and Hassan never forgot that truth. But knowledge alone does not build an empire. The story tells that after falling out of favour with local rulers, Hassan fled eastward, moving through deserts and mountains, until he came upon a fortress that would change history. Alamut, the eagle's nest. Perched above the valleys of northern Persia, it was said to be impregnable, a stone labyrinth touching the clouds. Hassan took it not by war, but by cunning. He infiltrated its defences through patience and persuasion, converting the garrison one man at a time. When at last he claimed it as his own, he transformed the fortress into something more than a stronghold. It became a sanctuary for the faithful and the feared alike. From the walls of Alamut, Hassan began to weave a network of belief stronger than steel. To outsiders, he was a madman or a magician. To his followers, a prophet of hidden truth. Yet beneath his devotion, a question lingers: was Hassan truly the architect of this new world, or merely the vessel of a deeper intelligence? His rise was too sudden, his success too precise, as if unseen forces guided his path. He claimed only loyalty to the unseen Imam, yet no one ever saw this figure, no messenger, no proof, only faith and obedience. The line between revelation and manipulation blurred. Perhaps Hassan Sabah was both master and servant, building an empire that served him in name but served another in purpose. The truth, as always, remained hidden behind the walls of Alamut, waiting for the right moment to reveal who truly sat upon the invisible throne. Within the stone embrace of Alamut, where clouds brushed the towers and silence ruled the courtyards, Hassan I Sabah shaped more than an army, he shaped a state of mind. The fortress became a living organism, its veins carrying messages, orders, and secrets that no outsider could trace. Every disciple who crossed its gates entered a world stripped of ordinary meaning. In its place, Hassan offered certainty. Faith was no longer an idea to be debated, but a weapon to be wielded. Through whispered teachings and meticulous ritual, he built an order that blurred the boundary between religion and strategy, devotion and obedience. Each initiate began as a servant of mystery. They were taught that truth existed in layers, that beneath every scripture and every symbol lay another meaning known only to the worthy. To serve Hassan was to move closer to this hidden core. In the dim halls of Alamut, they learned patience, silence, and precision. They were trained to disappear into crowds, to speak many tongues, to observe without emotion. Some were taught to die without hesitation, believing their sacrifice opened a gate to the paradise promised by the Imam. Hassan understood that control was not won through fear alone. It was built through belief so deep it erased doubt itself. Yet beyond the walls, the world trembled at their name. The Brotherhood's reach extended far beyond the mountains of Persia, threading through cities, mosques, and royal courts. Rumours told of daggers left beside pillows, of envoys who smiled one day and vanished the next. Kings called them Hashashin, a word that would drift through centuries and morph into assassin. To their enemies, they were ghosts intoxicated by drugs and devotion. To their followers, they were chosen instruments of divine order. But history, written by those who feared them, painted only half the picture. What if the tales of hashish and hallucination were deliberate distortions? Perhaps they were crafted by rivals seeking to discredit an enemy too intelligent to defeat. Or perhaps Hassan himself encouraged the myth, letting fantasy conceal the machinery of his empire. The mind, after all, is the most pliable weapon. A frightened ruler fights shadows instead of soldiers. A terrified population becomes its own prison. Still, there were whispers even within the fortress, quiet doubts about the source of Hassan's wisdom. Some disciples spoke of dreams too vivid, commands delivered in ways that defied reason. They wondered whether their master truly served the hidden Imam, or something far more obscure. Did unseen voices shape the creed of Alamut, using Hassan as their mouthpiece? The records offer no answer, only a chilling silence where explanation should be. As the assassin order grew, so too did the mystery surrounding the man who led it. His control seemed absolute, yet every empire has its unseen cracks. Beyond the mountains, other powers watched and waited. Soon, the question of who controlled whom would spill far beyond Alamut's walls, into a web of alliances and betrayals that reached the very heart of the medieval world. In the silent corridors of history, behind every movement that shook empires, there are always shadows, figures who never appear in chronicles but whose fingerprints linger on every decision. The assassins, for all their fame and infamy, were no exception. Their daggers struck with uncanny precision, their timing often benefiting powers far beyond their mountain fortresses. It is here that speculation begins to thicken. Perhaps the Brotherhood was never truly independent, but instead part of a far greater design, orchestrated by forces that preferred to remain invisible. The medieval world was not merely a contest of armies, it was a contest of information. Spies, merchants, and missionaries moved between warring empires, carrying both secrets and lies. In such a landscape, an organization like the Assassins, steeped in secrecy and utterly loyal, would have been an invaluable tool. Some chroniclers hint that even the Byzantine court in Constantinople maintained quiet contact with Hassan's successors, trading intelligence to destabilize common enemies. Others suggest that emissaries from the Fatimid Caliphate or rival Islamic sects manipulated the Brotherhood to remove inconvenient leaders without bearing the stain of open war. Yet there are whispers darker still, that the assassins' true patrons were not kings or caliphs at all, but hidden councils who profited from chaos itself. Every culture seemed to have its own name for these unseen arbiters, the veiled ones, the secret masters, the keepers of the balance. To some they were myth, to others the silent architects of civilization. The pattern, when traced through old letters and forgotten travelogues, is unsettling. Each time the assassins acted, someone else gained, territories shifted, alliances dissolved, thrones changed hands. Was this coincidence or choreography? The question turns like a key in a locked door, and what lies beyond it resists illumination. Even the legendary Old Man of the Mountain, the title given to each assassin Grand Master, may not have been the true leader. To the outside world he was the face of terror, the visible edge of a hidden system. But some accounts describe sudden changes in doctrine, abrupt alliances that defy logic, as if decisions came from elsewhere, from advisors whose names were never recorded. The old man, it seems, was both king and captive of his own creation. And so the trail leads deeper into uncertainty. What if the Brotherhood's fanatic loyalty was not to their master at Alamut, but to another master entirely, one that neither history nor legend dares to name? The idea unsettles, but it also fits too neatly into the pattern of manipulation that defines the medieval world. After all, power rarely reveals its true source. It hides in the spaces between events, in the silence after an order is given. Some say that to understand the assassins, one must not look at their victims, but at those who benefited from their deaths. And when those names are traced, they converge with another secretive order, one born in the West, cloaked in the red cross of faith but driven, perhaps, by the same unseen hand. Across the windswept deserts and blood-soaked fields of the Crusades, two orders, one born in the East, the other in the West, moved like reflections of one another. Both wrapped in secrecy, both feared by kings, both devoted to a higher cause they refused to name. The Knights Templar and the Assassins were said to be mortal enemies, yet beneath the clash of faith and empire, a quieter story may have been unfolding, a story of unlikely alliance and shared purpose. On the surface, they could not have been more different. The Templars wore white mantles emblazoned with red crosses, swearing loyalty to Christ and the Pope. The Assassins, hidden within mountain fortresses, followed the invisible imam and served no worldly ruler. Yet both orders transcended politics. They answered to codes that ordinary men could not decipher, and both held the same silent weapon, knowledge. While Crusaders fought for visible victories, these two groups traded in information, moving gold, secrets, and influence with invisible precision. Historians describe strange truces between them. Templar caravans passing safely through assassin lands, emissaries exchanging gifts instead of arrows. Such moments defy the narrative of holy war, hinting that something deeper bound them. One theory suggests that the Templars, faced with enemies on all sides, recognized the value of the assassins' network. In return for gold or political favor, the Brotherhood could remove threats that no sword could reach. Another theory, darker still, proposes that both groups were guided by the same unseen patrons, the hidden councils that thrived on perpetual conflict. Through war, they shaped the flow of wealth, faith, and empire, each order acting as one half of a larger, intricate mechanism. If this was true, the Crusades themselves were not merely a clash of religions, but a theatre carefully staged by those who profited from its chaos. The parallels between the two orders are uncanny. Both established fortified strongholds, both used coded rituals of initiation, both guarded relics and secrets said to contain forbidden knowledge. Even their downfall followed the same arc. Adored by some, envied by rulers, and finally crushed under accusations of heresy. It is as though they shared the same destiny, written long before either was born. But the most haunting question remains, did they ever meet? A single fragment from a 13th century chronicle describes a secret parley between a Templar envoy and the master of Alamut. The meeting's purpose is lost, its outcome unwritten. Perhaps it was a truce, perhaps an agreement, or perhaps something far stranger, a recognition between two pieces of the same hidden design. When the Templars fell in Europe, hunted by the very church they served, whispers claimed that remnants of their order fled east, seeking refuge among old allies. Some said they found shelter in the ruins of Alamut itself. Whether truth or invention, the idea lingers like smoke over history's fire. Two orders, once divided by faith, reunited in secrecy. And if that is true, then the fall of the assassins was never the end. It was only the moment the puppets vanished, leaving their masters to move unseen once more. The Mongols came like a storm that no fortress could withstand. From the east, their armies moved with an inevitability that felt more like fate than conquest. Vast, disciplined, and without mercy. For years, the assassins had survived the shifting tides of empires by mastering the art of manipulation. They had traded allegiance like currency, offering daggers in the dark in exchange for temporary peace. But when the Mongols appeared on the horizon, no alliance, no secret, could save them. Their supposed allies turned silent, and the network that once protected them dissolved like sand in wind. The assassins had been useful tools, scouts, spies, and silent killers employed by kings and caliphs alike. They had delivered messages in blood, removed rivals, and tilted the balance of power for those who paid the right price. Yet when the Mongol envoys demanded submission, those same rulers found new virtue in loyalty. None stood between Alamut and the approaching tide. The Brotherhood, once feared by empires, was left exposed, surrounded by a silence that felt almost deliberate. Inside Alamut's stone walls, the old man's successors watched the plains below fill with fire. They had believed themselves untouchable, protected by faith, secrecy, and reputation. But reputation cannot stop an empire that sees all belief as weakness. As the Mongols drew closer, the assassins' intricate web of influence collapsed. Messages went unanswered, allies vanished. It was as if the world had conspired to erase them. Some chroniclers claim betrayal letters exchanged in secret between neighboring rulers and the Mongol generals, agreements that promised survival in exchange for silence. The assassins, it seemed, had outlived their usefulness. When the siege began, Alamut stood defiant against the thunder of catapults and the endless sea of riders. For days the mountains echoed with the sounds of war. But when the gates finally fell, there was no last stand, no heroic martyrdom, only surrender. The Mongols entered the fortress not as conquerors of legend, but as executioners performing a grim ritual. The libraries were burned, the gardens destroyed, and the towers that had once scraped the sky were reduced to rubble. It was as though history itself sought to wipe the memory of the Brotherhood from existence. Yet amid that ruin, one question endures. Who orchestrated the silence before the fall? The Mongols were merciless, but their precision hints at something else. Intelligence, inside knowledge of the Brotherhood's defenses, the kind only a trusted ally could provide. Some whispered that betrayal came from within, a disciple who traded secrets for life. Others believed the Mongols were merely the blade wielded by an invisible hand. Either way, Alamut's destruction marked not just the end of a fortress, but the beginning of a mystery. And as the smoke rose over the mountains, the world thought the assassins had perished forever. But legends rarely die so easily. Sometimes, they simply change their shape, waiting for the right moment to return. When the smoke finally cleared over the ruins of Alamut, the Mongols believed they had extinguished a nightmare. The towers that once reached for the heavens lay in pieces, the libraries turned to ash, and the bodies of the last defenders were scattered like dust in the wind. Yet history, as it often does, refused to end where men thought it should. The assassins, whose name had once inspired terror across continents, began to fade from record but not from memory. In the centuries that followed, rumors whispered of their return, of hidden cells that survived the fire and carried their secrets into new worlds. Perhaps the Brotherhood had died, or perhaps it had simply learned to live unseen. Travelers told strange tales. In Persia, an aging scholar swore he had seen a hooded man wearing the insignia of the old sect. In the mountains of Syria, villagers spoke of figures who appeared only at dusk, taking nothing, leaving only warnings. In Europe, during the height of the Renaissance, certain thinkers began to write of Eastern adepts, who possessed knowledge far older than their time, knowledge of control, secrecy, and patience. Their words echoed the very principles once preached in Alamut's halls. Coincidence, perhaps, or the faint pulse of something that refused to die. Even as the centuries unfolded, the methods of the assassins seemed to echo in other movements. Small, invisible cells bound by oaths of loyalty, the use of fear as language, the careful balancing of faith and pragmatism. It was as if fragments of Alamut's creed had scattered across the world like seeds carried by the wind. Some historians saw this as imitation, others as proof that the Brotherhood had survived in another form. For how could a network so deeply rooted in secrecy be completely destroyed? A shadow cannot be burned, it only shifts when light changes direction. Still, the world preferred a simpler ending. It was easier to believe the assassins had perished than to face the thought that their doctrines might have seeped into the foundations of politics, religion, and espionage. Yet the evidence lingers like faint fingerprints on glass. Hidden references in Venetian archives, anomalies in Ottoman records, names that vanish mid-sentence from royal decrees. These fragments do not prove survival, but they refuse to allow closure. And so, the line between history and rumor remains blurred. Perhaps that was the Brotherhood's final victory, to erase itself so completely that it became immortal. Their fall was recorded as destruction, but destruction is merely transformation seen through the eyes of the conqueror. The assassins may have lost their mountains, but they gained what no fortress could contain: legend. As centuries passed, the story of the assassins became a mirror, held up to power itself, reflecting the eternal dance between visibility and control. For even as their stronghold crumbled, their ideas endured. buried deep in the secret architecture of human ambition, and somewhere in that silence, the echo of Alamut still breathes. Centuries after the last towers of Alamut fell, the assassins began to live again, not in the flesh but in story. What was once whispered in fear around desert fires became written legend, reshaped by imagination and distance. Chroniclers from Europe, who had only glimpsed their power, filled the gaps in truth with fantasy. They described gardens of illusion, where followers were drugged with hashish and promised paradise for loyalty. They wrote of a demonic, old man of the mountain who ruled by terror, sending his acolytes to kill kings and caliphs alike. These tales spread faster than the truth ever could, because the world loves mystery more than accuracy. Thus, the myth of the assassins was born not carved in stone but painted in rumour. As centuries passed, the legend only deepened. Writers and travellers retold their stories as cautionary parables, warnings about blind faith, obedience, and power cloaked in secrecy. Marco Polo's account turned Alamut into a dreamlike prison of illusion, where followers lived in a false paradise before being sent to die. Western audiences devoured the tale, unaware that Polo had likely never seen the fortress at all. His version replaced the real assassin scholars, strategists, believers with caricatures of fanaticism. The truth was buried beneath the very myth that kept their memory alive. But myths have their own strange power. The assassin legend endured through Renaissance manuscripts, Enlightenment, curiosity, and Victorian fascination. Poets and philosophers found in them a symbol of rebellion, men who defied empires by wielding silence instead of armies. Their creed of precision and patience resonated in an age of intrigue. Even Voltaire, half in jest, admired their discipline, calling them the true masters of practical philosophy. The Brotherhood's mystique transcended religion and history, morphing into an archetype. The unseen hand, the solitary killer bound to a secret code. Modern culture transformed that archetype again. Novels, films, and games turned the assassins into heroes and anti-heroes alike. Freedom fighters against tyranny, guided by unseen truth. Their daggers became metaphors for justice, their secrecy a reflection of our fascination with power that hides behind masks. Yet the more their story was retold, the further it drifted from the fragments left in ancient records. We came to know not the assassins who were, but the ones we needed them to be. Still, in every retelling, a shadow of the original remains. The idea of a hidden brotherhood that shapes the course of history continues to haunt us, because somewhere deep within, it feels possible. History's silence often conceals design. And perhaps, what began as myth was only the surface of a truth too dangerous to preserve. The legends gave the assassins immortality, but also disguise. Beneath the symbols and stories, their real influence may never have faded at all, only changed its name, waiting for a new century to carry their torch into the world once more. History has a way of repeating itself not in form, but in essence. The assassins may have vanished from the chronicles of power, yet the pattern they perfected continued to echo through centuries of intrigue. In modern times, their legacy has found new shapes, secretive networks that operate beyond the light of government, groups that borrow their name or ideals, and individuals who study their methods as if decoding an ancient science of control. Whether they call themselves societies, orders, or simply cells, the principle remains the same: power thrives best when unseen. Throughout the 20th century, whispers of their rebirth resurfaced in strange places. Intelligence agencies studied medieval espionage tactics and found eerie parallels. Covert operatives spoke of asymmetric warfare, a term that could have been written in Alamut's doctrine centuries earlier. Even the language of modern politics, the quiet removal of obstacles, the manipulation of faith and perception seems to echo the assassin's cold precision. The tools have changed, blades replaced by data, fortresses by servers. Yet the architecture of secrecy remains hauntingly familiar. Some claim that small groups, hidden in regions once ruled by the assassins, still preserve fragments of their creed. They speak of mountain villages where oaths are whispered, where loyalty is bound not by flag or crown but by lineage and silence. These stories surface in old intelligence files, in footnotes of declassified documents that seem too peculiar to be fiction. Whether true or born of fascination, such tales remind us that the line between imitation and inheritance is thin. Beyond the physical, the assassin legacy also thrives in ideas. The concept of selective violence as political expression, the belief that control lies not in armies but in information, these notions shaped the strategies of revolutionaries and governments alike. In the Cold War's shadows, invisible battles mirrored the same philosophy Hassan once wielded, that a single, unseen hand could tilt the balance of nations. Every assassination masked as diplomacy, every coup justified by stability carries a whisper from Alamut's teachings. And yet, the fascination goes deeper than politics. Modern secret societies, from urban brotherhoods to digital movements, have borrowed the assassin's aura, the mystery, the silence, the ritual. The symbol of the hidden blade has become shorthand for rebellion against oppressive systems. In this way, the assassins have transcended their history, transforming into an idea far more enduring than any empire. To some, they represent the ultimate expression of freedom. To others, the danger of absolute conviction. What remains certain is that the Brotherhood never truly left. Its principles flow quietly through our institutions, our stories, even our fears. The shape has changed, but the shadow remains. And as the world grows more connected yet more secretive, one must wonder whether the assassins' greatest legacy is not their methods, but their invisibility, the art of surviving in plain sight. Because if history teaches anything, it is that the most powerful forces are not those we see, but those we feel moving beneath the surface, guiding us still. For centuries, historians have written of the assassin's destruction as if it were final, a clean break in time, a moment when a single empire's fury erased an entire order. But history rarely closes its doors so neatly. The Mongols may have razed the fortress of Alamut, burned its libraries, and scattered its followers. Yet something about the story refuses to stay buried. Every few decades, new fragments emerge: letters, symbols, accounts of men who spoke in riddles about loyalty and truth, always hinting that the Brotherhood had merely shed its skin. When one studies the centuries that followed the fall, an odd pattern appears. From the ruins of Persia to the cities of Syria, pockets of influence continued to flicker in places where the assassins once ruled. Certain families preserved strange rituals. A handful of scholars guarded texts that seemed to carry coded instructions. Even travelers noted mysterious communities who lived by an unwritten law, worshipped in secret, and spoke of the hidden path. Were these echoes of the old sect or descendants continuing its creed in silence? The evidence is thin, yet the consistency of these reports feels too deliberate to dismiss. Modern historians often disagree. Some argue the assassins dissolved entirely, absorbed into Sufi brotherhoods or Ismaili offshoots, their identity erased by survival itself. Others whisper of something more deliberate, a reorganization into a quieter, more adaptable form. No more fortresses, no banners or grandmasters, only cells hidden within ordinary society, operating under new names. To disappear, after all, was the most perfect form of victory. A secret cannot die if it learns to breathe invisibly. Contemporary researchers who have dared to trace the lineage of the Brotherhood often describe a strange sensation, as though history itself resists their investigation. Documents vanish, sources contradict, archives close without explanation. It is almost as if someone or something still guards the story. A handful of conspiracy theorists take this further, claiming that modern organizations dedicated to global intelligence, financial manipulation, or ideological movements bear uncanny resemblance to Alamut's principles. Secrecy, hierarchy, control through influence rather than force. Such parallels could be coincidence, or they could be the fingerprints of an ancient method reinvented for a new age. When interviewed, occult historians speak cautiously. They describe an enduring philosophy that outlived its founders, that true power is invisible, that control lies in belief, not armies. Whether by accident or by design, this philosophy has threaded itself through centuries of political and spiritual movements. And though no fortress stands to prove their survival, perhaps the assassins no longer need one. Their fortress, now, is the world itself: every institution, every network of information, every unseen exchange. If they did survive, they learned the final lesson of secrecy, that the best place to hide is behind the illusion of extinction. And maybe, just maybe, they have never stopped watching. Every age invents its own shadows. The modern world, with all its satellites, screens, and endless data, likes to imagine itself transparent. But beneath the flood of information, secrecy has simply changed costume. In whispers across intelligence circles, online forums, and obscure publications, one name continues to reappear: the Assassins. Not the medieval order that haunted the Crusades, but something that feels like its reflection adapted, decentralized, and woven into the machinery of modern power. The suggestion alone unsettles historians, yet the parallels remain impossible to ignore. When political figures fall under mysterious circumstances, when covert wars shift the balance of nations, there are always those who claim to see the same pattern: the invisible precision, the strike that leaves no trace. In these accounts, the Assassin's Creed has evolved into a doctrine of influence rather than blades. Assassination, once a physical act, has become ideological. Minds are shaped, loyalties redirected, outcomes engineered without bloodshed. It is the same old method refined for a digital century: control through belief. In this light, the assassins did not vanish. They merely traded daggers for narratives. Some scholars point towards secret societies that arose in the centuries following Alamut's fall: the Rosicrucians, the Illuminists, later the various Masonic lodges that spanned continents. Each carried hints of the old symbols, pyramids, eyes, veiled initiations, the promise of enlightenment through hidden knowledge. None could be directly traced to the assassins, yet each seemed to borrow from the same silent vocabulary. Even within modern institutions of power, financial, political, or military, one can sense echoes of Alamut's invisible architecture: obedience through faith, loyalty through secrecy, the eternal separation between those who know and those who serve. Of course, skeptics dismiss such links as fantasy. They argue that the assassins have become a metaphor for conspiracy itself, an easy ghost to project onto every unexplained event. Yet, the persistence of the myth is its own mystery. Why, after 8 centuries, does the idea of the Brotherhood still haunt the edges of our collective imagination? Perhaps because it speaks to a deeper truth that history has always been written by the visible hand while guided by the invisible one. Consider how modern intelligence agencies operate: their networks, their coded communications, their compartmentalized structures. They resemble the assassin's original model more than any medieval army ever did. Coincidence or inheritance? The line between study and continuation grows faint when methods survive longer than their makers. We may never prove that the assassin's lineage threads through our present, but the world we inhabit, one of unseen surveillance, strategic illusion, and manufactured belief, feels strangely familiar to the world they once imagined. Perhaps their greatest victory was not survival, but transformation. The Brotherhood may no longer hide in mountains. It hides in systems, in ideologies, in the quiet mechanisms that steer nations without ever revealing their hand. And if so, the assassin's work is not a relic of the past, it is the unseen rhythm of the present, still unfolding beneath the surface of our reality. Every empire builds its laws upon fear, but the assassins built theirs upon conviction. To the outside world, they were little more than murderers cloaked in mysticism, blades drawn from the darkness without conscience or mercy. Yet inside the Brotherhood, their actions followed a logic that few could comprehend. Every strike, every silent disappearance, was governed by a code, a philosophy both sacred and practical, a belief that order could only be born through precision and sacrifice. Their creed was not written in scripture but in discipline, shaped by faith and necessity, molded into a doctrine that promised meaning in a world that had long since lost it. The code began with loyalty, not to man or throne, but to an idea. The assassins believed truth was hidden beneath the illusions of power, that the visible world was a veil concealing deeper realities. Their mission was not conquest, but correction, a relentless pruning of corruption from within. To serve the Brotherhood was to accept invisibility, to erase the self in favor of something eternal. Those who faltered were not punished with death, they were punished with remembrance, for to exist outside the code was to lose the purity of purpose. Each assassin lived by 3 unspoken vows: discipline, silence, and sacrifice. Discipline kept the blade steady, silence protected the mission, sacrifice ensured the soul remained untainted by pride. To outsiders, these men seemed cold, detached, even fanatical, but perhaps their detachment was the only way to survive a life without recognition or forgiveness. In the quiet halls of Alamut, where the wind carried the scent of stone and mountain frost, initiates learned that their lives were no longer their own. Each act of killing was not cruelty, it was duty, performed without pleasure, without hatred. They were not executioners, but instruments of balance, believing that to remove one corrupt life could preserve 1,000 more. And yet, their code was not without contradiction. It demanded faith in a truth that could never be proven, obedience to a master unseen. The assassins called this surrender enlightenment, the moment when logic bends beneath something greater. But to others, it looked like blindness, the slow erosion of individuality in service of a machine built on belief. In this paradox lies the fascination that still endures today. The Brotherhood's principles, at once noble and ruthless, have echoed across centuries, inspiring secretive orders and disciplined societies that thrive in silence. In a world still ruled by hidden motives, their code feels strangely familiar. Corporations, governments, intelligence agencies all reward obedience, secrecy, and sacrifice. Perhaps we never truly outgrew the assassin's philosophy, we merely dressed it in modern language. The Brotherhood may have vanished, but their discipline remains a mirror reflecting the structures of control that shape our lives. Their creed was not meant to end, it was designed to endure, quietly guiding those who understand that power, to remain pure, must remain unseen. If the assassin's code was their compass, their training was the forge that gave it edge. Within the fortress walls of Alamut, the process of transformation began not through brute strength or endless drills, but through the dismantling of self. A recruit entered as an ordinary man and left as a shadow, his fears dismantled, his doubts stripped away until only purpose remained. This was not education, it was rebirth. The assassins understood what most armies never could, that true power lies not in the body, but in the mind that commands it. The first lessons were not of weapons but of patience. Disciples spent days in silence, listening to the wind move through the stone corridors, watching the rhythm of the mountains. They were taught to slow their heartbeat, to calm the mind until awareness sharpened like a blade. Meditation became a weapon as vital as steel. It allowed them to act without hesitation, to move through chaos untouched by emotion. Fear, Hassani Sabar once said, is the greatest enemy of faith, and so they learned to kill it, piece by piece, through ritual and endurance. Once the mind was quiet, the second stage began. Immersion into illusion. The outside world would later twist this into tales of narcotics and hallucination, of men intoxicated with false visions of paradise. But the truth was subtler, perhaps more dangerous. Recruits were subjected to controlled deceptions, staged betrayals, impossible tasks, orchestrated failures, all to fracture their perception of reality. When everything familiar became uncertain, they learned to trust only the Brotherhood. In that dependency, the old self died. What remained was a being capable of perfect obedience, perfect calm, perfect violence. But beneath this discipline was an understanding that bordered on genius. To defeat chaos, one must become comfortable within it. The assassins were trained not to react but to read, to see patterns where others saw coincidence. Infiltrating cities, they could vanish among beggars and merchants, their minds conditioned to absorb every sound and silence. They learned languages, customs, faiths not to imitate, but to dissolve within them. This was psychological warfare centuries ahead of its time, a system designed to weaponize adaptability. Some modern scholars see in their training the earliest form of behavioral conditioning, even the precursor to intelligence methodologies used today. But others detect something older, almost spiritual, a fusion of mysticism and discipline that unlocked regions of the mind most never reach. Whether through prayer, deprivation, or controlled illusion, they turned human will into an instrument of precision. It is said that a true assassin feared neither death nor discovery, for both were illusions. Only the mission was real. In this they achieved what philosophers still chase: the mastery of self through surrender. Their training was not merely to serve the Brotherhood, it was to transcend the boundaries of what it meant to be human. And as we follow their transformation from mind to motion, we step closer to the art of their unseen craft, the tactics that turned thought into power. In an age ruled by armies and empires, the assassins learned to make invisibility their weapon. Where others relied on walls and steel, they relied on silence. A single blade, placed at the right moment, could shift the fate of kingdoms more effectively than 1,000 soldiers. This was their genius, the understanding that power is not about strength but perception. Fear, once planted, could conquer where armies failed. Their most dangerous skill was patience. They could wait months, even years, for the perfect opportunity. A target might see his shadow in the same faces every day: servants, guards, merchants, never realizing one of them was not what he seemed. The assassins mastered disguise not as performance, but as transformation. They studied gestures, accents, the rhythm of speech. They became invisible, not by vanishing, but by blending so perfectly that the world forgot to look for them. When they struck, the act felt like destiny itself, as though the universe had turned against the victim. Historical chronicles tell of leaders who woke to find daggers pinned beside their beds, engraved with a single symbol, the mark of the Brotherhood. These warnings were rarely ignored. Many rulers altered their policies overnight, sparing lives, changing allegiances, even surrendering fortresses to avoid the blade that could appear from anywhere. The assassins understood that the most efficient kill was the one that never needed to happen. Their presence alone was enough to shape history. For those who ignored the warning, the Brotherhood's methods were swift and surgical. Assassinations took place in public, often during prayer, at court, or amid celebration. Moments of supposed safety turned to chaos. Yet what stunned witnesses most was not the act, but the calm precision of it. The assassin never fled. Capture was expected, even welcomed. Death, to them, was merely the closing of one chapter in eternal service. That fear, the knowledge that their killers did not value survival, broke the minds of their enemies before the blade ever touched them. They were masters not only of death, but of illusion. Through misinformation, planted rumors, and calculated mystery, they turned their small numbers into an empire of fear. They let the world believe they had eyes everywhere, that their reach was limitless, their loyalty unshakable. By controlling perception, they controlled reality. Their tactics were not chaos, they were theater, and the stage was every throne room in the Middle East. Each operation was a study in control. Even in failure, they achieved victory, for each failed attempt only deepened the terror of what they might do next. To rule by fear is fragile, to rule by uncertainty is eternal. And so the assassins became not just executioners, but storytellers, authors of the invisible narrative that held empires in its grip. Their methods were not magic, yet to those who faced them, it felt as though they commanded forces beyond human understanding. Perhaps in a way they did. For behind every act of stealth and precision lay a deeper science, one that blurred the line between faith and technology. To the outside world, the assassins seemed like phantoms, creatures of instinct and faith. Yet those who studied them closely began to suspect something else: intellect. Beneath the veil of mysticism, the Brotherhood had cultivated a secret understanding of science far beyond its time. They were not merely killers, they were engineers of precision, chemists of deception, and masters of human perception. Their art was rooted not in chaos but in design, where every motion followed a logic as exact as any equation. The assassins understood the power of knowledge, not only in philosophy but in the manipulation of matter itself. Within their fortresses, scholars studied herbs and minerals, mapping their effects with the same devotion others gave to scripture. They discovered mixtures that could induce sleep or silence pain, concoctions that mimicked death for hours. Some poisons acted instantly, others delayed, blooming inside the body like secrets waiting for their appointed moment. It was said that they could kill with a single drop, or save with another two sides of the same mastery. To an outsider, this looked like sorcery. To them, it was simply understanding nature's subtler laws. Their command of chemistry extended to the battlefield of the mind. Smoke bombs laced with herbs that distorted vision, powders that burned without flame, and inks that vanished after reading. These were tools meant not only to deceive the senses but to bend reality itself. Even their use of light and shadow within their mountain fortresses hinted at architectural genius. Halls designed to confuse intruders, walls angled to carry whispers, and towers positioned to vanish into the mist. Everything they built served a purpose, from concealment to revelation. Yet, their greatest experiment was not in laboratories or workshops, but in the human psyche. The assassins studied fear, as others studied medicine. They learned how to dose it precisely how a symbol carved into a blade, a whisper in a marketplace, or an unexplained disappearance could unravel the mind faster than any weapon. Their enemies fought not men, but the illusion of omnipresence, the sense that death itself had chosen a side. Some modern historians suggest that their secret studies laid foundations for later scientific progress. Alchemy giving rise to chemistry, architecture merging with geometry, coded communication, evolving into the early logic of cryptography. Whether coincidence or inheritance, the pattern feels deliberate. Knowledge, once hidden in the towers of Alamut, seems to have trickled into the bloodstream of civilization itself. The Brotherhood may have perished, but their curiosity survived, carried by those who understood that secrecy was the guardian of discovery. In the end, the assassins' genius lay in their synthesis of science and faith. They used knowledge not to explain the world, but to control it. To their enemies, this was dark magic. To them, it was the art of creation, the ability to see what others dismissed as impossible and make it real. And as their secrets spread silently through the centuries, the echoes of their innovations would shape the very systems built to destroy them. The assassins began as a whisper in the mountains of Persia, yet their influence spread like ripples across the world's greatest empires. What started as a small brotherhood of believers soon altered the balance of medieval power, reaching far beyond their hidden fortresses. They understood something that generals and kings did, not that the fate of empires rests not on the size of armies, but on the fragility of a single mind. By striking at the right moment, in the right place, they could shape history without ever marching to war. During the Crusades, their presence haunted every campfire. Kings and knights spoke their name with unease, not knowing whether the stranger who poured their wine or sharpened their blade might belong to the Brotherhood. The assassins eliminated political figures who threatened their vision of balance, regardless of faith. Sunni, Shia, Crusader, it made no difference. Their loyalty was not to nations but to equilibrium. Some chroniclers claim that their assassinations prevented all-out war between rival Muslim factions, while others believe they prolonged the Crusades by removing leaders who might have brokered peace. In either case, they bent the rhythm of history to their will. Their most infamous victims were not always slain for revenge, but for the message their deaths would send. Viziers, generals, even caliphs fell, their loss echoing across kingdoms. When the mighty Seljuk Empire began to fracture, it was the assassins' silent pressure, targeted killings, whispered threats that accelerated its decline. They forced rulers to rule with caution, diplomats to second-guess their allies, and armies to move slower for fear of invisible enemies. The fear of the unseen blade became a political force as tangible as gold or steel. Even the Mongols, who considered themselves unstoppable, paused when they heard of the Brotherhood. Before their conquest of Persia, several Mongol generals were reportedly murdered under mysterious circumstances. Some accounts suggest that this provoked their campaign of extermination against the assassins, yet others believe it was precisely what the Brotherhood intended to lure their enemies into a war of overreach, one that drained Mongol resources in the mountains. Their defeat at Alamut may have seemed absolute, but even in destruction, the assassins altered the path of empire. Their influence did not end with the fall of their strongholds. The methods they pioneered, selective elimination, manipulation through fear, and information control, outlived the men themselves. Rulers across continents adopted fragments of their philosophy. The idea that a small unseen force could shift the destiny of nations became a permanent part of human strategy. If history is a tapestry, then the assassins were the hidden threads woven through it, binding events that might otherwise have unraveled. And perhaps, without their invisible hand, the world as we know it, the alliances, the religions, the empires that rose from the ashes, might have been utterly unrecognizable. Their influence did not vanish, it evolved. And in that evolution lies the bridge between the age of swords and the age of secrets. The world has changed beyond the wildest imagination of the medieval age, yet in the quiet spaces between nations, the echo of the assassins can still be heard. Their creed of stealth and precision, their mastery of manipulation, and their use of fear as strategy have survived, refined, and disguised beneath the language of modern intelligence. Today, satellites and drones may have replaced daggers, but the principle remains the same: to strike unseen, to control the outcome before the world even realizes a battle has begun. Every major intelligence service carries traces of the Brotherhood's philosophy. The compartmentalized cells of covert agencies, where each member knows only what is necessary, mirror the assassin structure of secrecy. Agents operate in plain sight, identities buried beneath layers of falsehood. The psychological conditioning of elite operatives, detachment from self, unwavering obedience to mission. The acceptance of death as inevitability reads like a modern adaptation of the teachings once whispered in the halls of Alamut. The tools are different, yet the essence is hauntingly familiar. Even the concept of targeted elimination, so precise that it reshapes geopolitics without open war, is a direct descendant of assassin strategy. Modern states now conduct operations that resemble those medieval missions, swift, silent, and officially invisible. Each action justified as protection of order, each consequence echoing far beyond its intended scope. What the assassins once did with blades, modern powers now accomplish with information, propaganda, and surveillance. The battlefield has become invisible, fought in mines and networks instead of streets and fortresses. The assassins also pioneered the idea that control through perception is more powerful than force. Modern governments and intelligence agencies understand this deeply. Disinformation, psychological operations, the manipulation of belief, all trace their lineage to the Brotherhood's understanding that to alter perception is to alter reality. When an enemy believes he is surrounded, he often destroys himself without a single strike. The assassins mastered that centuries before psychology gave it language. In military doctrine, small special operations teams trained to infiltrate, eliminate, and vanish embody their legacy. The creed of few against many, of skill over number, remains the cornerstone of elite warfare. To modern operatives, the assassins are not myth but mirror, proof that a disciplined mind can bend the fate of nations. Whether consciously or not, today's covert warriors walk paths first carved by those mountain-born disciples of secrecy. And while the world no longer calls them by name, the pattern endures. The modern age is built on the same paradox the assassins once embraced, that true power is invisible, and true control leaves no trace. In every unseen operation, every silent shift in global balance, their philosophy lives on, reimagined by new hands. Their legacy is not buried in ruins or confined to legend. It moves within the algorithms of espionage, the languages of deception, the calm faces of those who act, while the world sleeps proof that the Brotherhood's invisible empire never truly ended, it only changed its tools. We have travelled across centuries, tracing the assassins from whispers in the mountains to their ghostly echoes in the modern world. We have walked through fortresses now reduced to dust, followed the faint trail of their secrets, and heard the stories told by both their enemies and their admirers. Yet even after all of it, the truth feels as elusive as ever. The Brotherhood seems to exist in two worlds, one that history records and one that history refuses to see. Between the two lies the great unanswered question: who were they really? The records we possess are unreliable, shaped by fear, propaganda, and imagination. Much of what we know about the assassins was written by those who sought to destroy them. To the Crusaders, they were demons disguised as men. To the rival caliphates, heretics who betrayed Islam. Even to later historians, they were a convenient symbol proof that fanaticism can hide behind philosophy. But within the silences of these records lies something unsettling. Too much precision, too much control for a mere band of zealots. It's as if someone carefully curated their legacy, ensuring that only fragments remained, just enough to mystify but never to reveal. Some scholars argue that this is the point that the assassins built their own myth, weaving it into the fabric of history so tightly that fact and fiction would forever blur. If so, they succeeded. Every version of their story feels both incomplete and deliberate, as if the truth has been hidden in plain sight. Were they servants of faith or architects of manipulation? Were their killings acts of devotion, or a smokescreen for something far greater? Every answer opens a new question, and each theory collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Even now, new evidence surfaces only to deepen the mystery. Ancient manuscripts discovered in obscure libraries, letters written in code still unsolved, relics said to bear the insignia of the Brotherhood, all whisper different truths. Historians debate endlessly, their conclusions dissolving into speculation. The assassins seem to defy the logic of time itself, reappearing wherever power hides its true face. Perhaps that is their greatest triumph, to exist eternally as an enigma. Their survival depends not on monuments or records, but on mystery. As long as people question, the Brotherhood remains alive. They were not meant to be understood, only remembered. And in that remembrance they continue to shape how we perceive secrecy, control, and the invisible architecture of power. So what remains hidden? Perhaps the answer lies not in the ruins of Alamut, but in us, in our fascination with what cannot be known, and our fear that the world's deepest truths were never lost at all, only concealed. Because every mystery, like every shadow, needs light to exist, and the assassins understood better than anyone how to control both. History eventually forgets all things, but some names refuse to fade. The assassins belong to that rare lineage of the eternal, the ones who live on, not through monuments or victories, but through the mysteries they leave behind. Their story is not one of conquest or religion alone. It is the story of knowledge hidden beneath obedience, of control disguised as faith. It speaks to something ancient within us, the human fascination with what moves unseen. Perhaps that is why their legend endures. Every age reimagines the assassins in its own image. Philosophers see them as seekers of hidden wisdom. Rebels see them as symbols of resistance. And rulers see in them the warning of what happens when belief turns to power. Yet their true legacy may lie not in the killings they committed, but in the questions they provoked. Who decides what is true? Who controls the story that becomes history? And how much of what we call reality is crafted by those we never see? The Brotherhood's methods, silence, patience, deception mirror the mechanisms of modern authority. Governments, corporations, and secret agencies all understand what the assassins knew centuries ago, that the world is governed not by those in sight, but by those who can shape perception from the shadows. It is a philosophy that continues to echo, disguised by technology, amplified by fear. In that sense, we are all still living in their age, surrounded by invisible hierarchies built on secrecy. Yet, there is something strangely comforting in their story too. For beneath the fear and manipulation lies the reminder that knowledge, even when hidden, cannot be destroyed. The assassins' fortresses may have fallen, but their ideas survived, travelling through trade routes, preserved in whispers, carried in books disguised as fables. They remind us that every attempt to erase truth only scatters it further, planting it in the most unexpected places. Maybe that is their true immortality. They became a mirror reflecting the duality of human nature, our desire for control and our yearning for freedom, our faith in order and our love of chaos. The assassins stood between both worlds, understanding that light cannot exist without shadow. They played the game of power so perfectly that even their downfall became part of the illusion. So perhaps the real question was never whether they survived. Perhaps the question is whether we ever escaped them. Their silence hums beneath the noise of modern civilization, reminding us that truth itself is a weapon, and that whoever wields it shapes the world. And as the centuries pass, their legend remains alive in stories, in secret orders, in the quiet conviction that there are still those who see the world not as it appears but as it is. The assassins may have vanished from sight, but their lesson lingers. Nothing that disappears is truly gone. Some things simply learn to hide forever.